Tables don't just spring to life by themselves. You need to feed them, care for them, adjust their rows and columns. But how do you adjust the rows and columns in a table? If I choose the selection tool and then try and drag over one of these column dividers, I don't move the column divider, I move the whole text frame. Let's undo that, Command-Z or Control-Z, and let's see how you're really supposed to do it. Remember that tables are inside text frames, and therefore you have to use the Type tool. I'll choose the Type tool from the tool panel and then click inside the table, and now I can actually click inside here and drag. I'll make this one a little bit narrower, make this one a little bit wider. You get the idea. You can just move these around. Now, notice that as I drag one of these column dividers, it changes all the columns in the table. They all move together. If I want to move a column divider without moving the other dividers, I hold down the Shift key. Shift drag moves just that one column. That way you can change a column divider and it won't change the width of the table. On the other hand, the Shift key does something different if you use it on the outside edge. Dragging the outside of the table by itself, no modifier key, just changes that one column, because there's nothing to the right of it to change. But if you hold down the Shift key, it does just the opposite. Shift drag moves all of them proportionally. So if you want to make the whole table wider or narrow proportionally, make sure you Shift drag on the outside of the table. Now, in this case, I just want the table to fit inside my text frame, so I'm simply going to drag it without the Shift key held down until it snaps to the side of the text frame. Now I'll make a few more changes here with the Shift key held down to make this fit better. Now I'm having a little trouble here because I want to make sure that these three columns, the second, third, and fourth column, are all the same width. It's hard to do that by eye, but it's easy to do if I use the Distribute Columns Evenly feature. I can find that by dragging over all three columns. You don't have to select the whole columns, just select those cells. Then I'll go to the Table menu and choose Distribute Columns Evenly. That forces InDesign to make the widths exactly the same. Notice that when I choose one or more cells, the control panel changes. It changes to indicate what's going on inside that cell, and then it lets me format it. I'm going to be talking about most of these features in the control panel later, but I do want to focus on one feature over here on the right side. This actually shows the width of these columns. You can see that right now it's set to 70 points. I could change this if I want. I could come in here and change it to, say, 68 points and hit Return or Enter, and you'll see that all three of those columns got narrowed just slightly. So you have a lot of control over the widths of your columns. What about rows? Same thing. I could use my Type tool to click and drag on a row divider to make it larger or smaller. Or I could adjust this in the control panel. Way up here, we can see we have the row height control. And I can see that the height of this row is currently 45.524 points. Now notice that there's a pop-up menu to the left of that, and it says at least. That means it's going to be at least 45 points. That means it could be larger than 45 points. If I put more text in there, it could grow, but it won't be smaller. If I want to specify an exact height for that row, I could change this from at least to exactly, and then specify the amount I want in here. Let's change that to, say, 55 points. So as you can see, managing these rows and columns is easy. Sometimes managing the data inside the rows and columns is harder. But there's a cool trick here that I want to point out before we move on, and that is I could go to the Edit menu and choose Story Editor. You probably remember from an earlier chapter that Story Editor is one of my favorite features, and for tables it's great because it lets me go in and edit tables really easily. I should say I'm editing the content inside the tables, not the tables themselves. In the Story Editor window, I can see all the data from my table, all laid out in rows and columns. It's a little bit confusing at first, but I'm going to scroll to the very top of my Story Editor window, and you'll see that at the very top I have the anchor table. Then InDesign's showing me what's on row 1, and then row 2, and row 3. I'm just looking at those little blue markers. I like Story Editor because I can easily find the data inside the table and then change it. I'll change this to Super Duper, and then close Story Editor with a Command-W or a Control-W on Windows, and you'll see that it automatically updated it in my table. So, managing all these rows and columns isn't all that difficult, but you do have to pay attention if you want a high-quality result. Now, in the next movie, we'll look at how to add or remove rows or columns, and even merge some of these cells together.